There's a late 19th century French novelist named Léon Blois who wrote a book called A Woman Who Was Poor. And one of the statements he made in that book was, or one of the statements he is quoted as having made in his life is that there's only one sorrow, the sorrow of not being a saint. Now, the context in which he said that didn't have anything to do with people with halos or people who were so holy that they're not somebody we could attempt to strive to be like in our lives. What the context of that statement was is the sorrow is that people miss the mark, that they're not whole. Holiness is wholeness, that you don't become the person you were meant to be. That you go through your life, you're born, you go through your life, and you die, and you never become the person that you were meant to be. That of all the people who have ever lived, you're the only one like you. The poet says, what I do is me, for that I came. That I came. I came into this world to be me. And so the question is, who am I? Family is a system. And I'm letting this mobile represent the idea of a family system. That as a system, it is the interdependence of the parts rather than the sum total of the parts. So the notion of a family system is the notion of feedback system, circularity, that each part affects every other part. So that if I push this part, notice what happens. Every other part is affected. If I push this part, every other part is affected. That every person in the system is interdependent on every other person in the system. So a dysfunctional relationship means you don't have two fully functional people. When they come together to relate to each other, each one is coming a kind of a half person that makes one whole person. Now, I told you in the first program that we have a crisis going on that is a crisis of even what we call normal. The idea is that we have long traditions of physical abuse. I talked to you about physical abuse, about Hitler being beaten every day in his family system. And of course the thing is, people will sit out there and say, well, I was beaten, but I didn't become an abuser. I didn't become a criminal. I didn't become a mass murderer. And frequently the people telling me that just don't even realize what they're saying. When I look at them and I see their dissociations, or I see their lack of feelings, or how much they're in a role or a script, or there's some workaholic with their family over here lonely and abandoned, and they're in denial about that. They've minimized their impact of their addiction on their family, their workaholic addiction on their family, and the kids are all in pain over it and feel abandoned by it. And that daddy will have all kind of ways to deny that and to minimize. See, part of the illness is denial and minimizing. In fact, a lot of victims of physical abuse don't know they were victimized. Don't know they were victimized. I would bet that there are a bunch of you in this audience that were physically abused who don't really know you were physically abused. Or you'll say, well, just a couple of times. Just a couple of times they really went crazy and knocked me around. The idea of not having my own reality, that is, giving up my own feelings, my own needs, my own thoughts, my own wants, which is what the core, as Terry has pointed out, the core of this problem is, that I don't live out of my own reality. I don't have a reality. I live off of other people's reality. To me, that is exactly what I talked about in the first program. There's only one sorrow, the sorrow of not being a saint, that is, being the one you were meant to be. Missing the mark and living your life and going to your death and never knowing who you are. Somebody once said you could go back 5,000 years and 5 million years and you'd never find anybody like you. Or you could go forward 5 million years and you'd never find anyone like you. That there never has been anyone like you. And the tragedy is that we go to our death never knowing the difference that makes the difference. My friend Mike Falls, an Episcopal priest, gave me a quote. I think it's Thoreau. He said, there is nothing so rare as an act of your own. Now, when I think about that, that is just awesome to me. I wanted to read you one final thing. This is from a book called Advice from a Failure by Jo Cardere, and it really sums it up. She says, you do not need to be loved, not at the cost of yourself. The single relationship that is truly central in a life is a relationship with yourself. It is rewarding to find someone you like, but essential to like yourself. It is quickening to recognize that someone is a good and decent human being, but it's indispensable to view your own self that way. It is a delight to discover people who are worthy of respect, admiration, and love, but it's vital to believe yourself deserving of respect, admiration, and love. For you cannot live in someone else. Listen to this. Of all the people that you will ever know in a lifetime, you are the only one that you will never lose or leave. To the question of your life, you're the answer. And to the problems of your life, you're the solution. To me, that sums it up. I have treasured that quotation, that of all the people that I will ever know in my whole life, I am the only one that I'll never leave or lose. And so if I don't have a relationship with me, how could I possibly have a relationship with anybody else? You know, I say to people, would you go to a motel with you this weekend? Terrible thing about shame is that shame is a feeling, and like all feelings, it rises and falls. But if you get shamed over and over again, if you've got shame-based parents, let's say your parent is an addict and the other parent is a codependent, those are not people who love themselves or have any reality. So they're shame-based. They couldn't possibly teach you how to love yourself or love anybody else because they're already shame-based. I've said it 20 times in this series. How can you teach somebody to love themselves if you don't love yourself? How can I possibly teach my children how to do that? So just think back, any of you who are watching right now, did your parents love themselves? Did you see the telltale signs of self-love? That they cared for themselves? They made sure they got their needs met? They were happy because they got their needs met? And if they didn't, then you had modeled for you shame-based people who didn't know how to teach you how to love. They couldn't teach you what they didn't know, and you couldn't learn what wasn't there to learn. So you see, not only is the internalization of shame happening because you're getting shamed by your self-absorbed parents who can't handle your spontaneity, can't handle your instinctual drives, can't handle the kind of narcissistic needs that a little child has. But they were also modeling for us. And then we got our feelings shamed, so that when I was angry, I was told it was one of the 7 deadly sins. When I was sad, I was called a ninny. If I was afraid, it was being a weenie. If I was joyous, there were still children starving in Latin America. So you couldn't be mad, you couldn't be glad, you couldn't be sad, you couldn't be afraid. Not much left. I said in the beginning program that the problem of our time is that we don't trust ourselves, that we make wrong choices because we have a wrong belief about ourselves. If I really can understand that I am the image of God, that there's a God center, there's a kingdom within, there's a still, quiet voice, that if I will be still and know that I will get information that's not belief anymore, it's absolute, immediate, intuitive information about me. That still, quiet voice, be still and know that I am God. That's what the meditators are telling us. That's what the traditions of spirituality have been telling us, the perennial traditions of spirituality, that there is a place that you're not alone, that the kingdom is within. And that is a healing kingdom. It is the deepest self. It is your true self. That your sociocultural ego, which is limited by language and culture, is not where it's at. There is a deeper place within you. And this is what makes life worthwhile ultimately, is to get to that place. That's what somebody has called homecoming. And I want to read you what they say about it. One never comes home until one prefers a gentle heart to mastery over other lives. One comes home when one learns how to bring a gift and how to receive one. When one is home, he gives love, makes comfort, hurts for justice. One is homeward bound when one is more tormented by the death of innocence and innocent children than by the frustration of ambition. One makes a home every time he allows a person to feel at home with their self. One is on the right road, not far away, close enough to run the last mile when he realizes that the greatest of all gifts to give another is home, and that the most surprising and wonderful gift to receive is homecoming. Now, to me, that's where it's at. That's what the family's about. We are the world. We are the people. If I can get to that deep self within me, that spiritual core, I can understand that this is the family. This is the human family. I can have this sense of oneness with all people and all things. I can rise above pettiness and division and fragmentation and alienation because I can find that home. And somebody said this, I think it's Oscar Wilde, that this is the true joy of life, to live for this higher purpose recognized by yourself, to be this mighty place, to be a force of nature rather than a feverish little clod of grievances and ailments, claiming that the world is not devoting itself to making me happy. My life belongs to the whole universe, and the more I work and the harder I work, the more I live. Life is its own splendid justification. It's not a flickering candle like Shakespeare said. It's rather a burning torch. And I want to make my torch burn as bright as I can before I hand it on to my children and before I hand it on to future generations. And to me, that's what human life is about, is finding that home within ourselves, that deep place within ourselves, that profound sense of self that nobody can take away from you. And you see, once I love myself and I'm in that home, that's the only thing I'll never have to work at again, is being myself. You see, and the battle that you will always lose is the battle that you have with yourself.